Welcome to the WazaMedia Podcast. WazaMedia is a digital marketing agency that believes in the power of storytelling. We show businesses and individuals how to communicate with laser focus in a media-saturated world. On this episode, we are talking with Roman Roberts, the host of Real Talk with Roman. You can find this awesome podcast on your favorite podcast platform. Just search for Real Talk with Roman. Roman, thanks for being on the show today.
Man, I'm so pumped to be here.
I'm so glad that we could do this, and I'm very thankful to the Bo and Luke show for connecting us together. So
yes,
major
we are both
props
top
to Bo and Luke.
six. We are top six.
Woo-woo.
I love it.
So Roman, the first thing that we'd like to do with our guests, because WazaMedia believes in the power of storytelling, we would like you to tell me a little bit about your story.
I love it, man. That's one of my favorite questions to ask too. So immediately drew me in. But the short version of my story is I started off in foster care in abusive homes, bounced around from place to place, got adopted. I like to say it was less than ideal kind of experience for me, and eventually drove me to a place where I wanted to get out of there as quickly as I could. So I joined the military, became an interrogator. Best, worst decision I've ever made in my life. And it took me all over the world, got to deploy multiple times, worked with special operations, politicians, like some of the biggest, baddest people in the world, got to be exposed to so much. But with that, took a big toll on me. So I transitioned from the military, and kind of the trauma from foster care and the trauma from deployments added up. And it got me to a place where I almost lost my marriage. I almost committed suicide. And the funny thing was it all stemmed from an inability to communicate, but I had spent my whole life communicating, right? But it wasn't real conversation. And that's what eventually drove me to seek help. I started going to therapy. I started journaling, rebuilt my connection with God, drove out some toxic people in my life, the whole journey to self-discovery kind of thing. And that helped me realize that it all came from real conversation, real talk, so to speak. And that inspired me to create the Real Talk with Roman podcast.
Wow, that is an awesome story. And wow, you've gone through a lot in your life. Just hearing just your short story on that one. Man, that's awesome.
Thank you.
And to find that with your podcast, it's almost become, if it almost seems like it's become a therapy session for you, being able to communicate and not only talking with others, but also in a sense, you're talking with yourself in a sense of reflection. Would you say so?
Oh, very much so. I mean, I tell everyone my podcast is therapeutic, and I will tell anyone who's thinking about getting in a podcast, if you don't have an obsession or a passion for yourself and therapy and health and things like that, you're probably not going to like podcasting, because it forces you to get deep with yourself. Anybody can talk, but to have a real authentic conversation with somebody, that takes work, and that takes knowing yourself, knowing how you communicate, knowing what you're trying to get from the conversation. And so, yeah, I mean, I talk to athletes, authors, veterans, homeschool moms, all of these different things in hopes that I can get 1% better. Podcasts helped me when I was at my worst. And so, I hope that I can in turn do the same thing. And it drove me to try so many things. I got to develop a meat rub. I've got to do so many crazy things because I jumped into podcasting. So the therapy goes beyond just that moment, right? Like, it's made me better at homeschooling my son, being a part of that education system. It's made me understand better some of the things my wife's saying. It's made me understand better some of the things businesses are saying. So it's definitely not a one area, right? Like, even if you had a podcast that was about sexuality, it would branch over into other parts of your life, right? Like, you just can't contain it. Once you start getting into those conversations and getting into people's story, as you know, I mean, it gets so deep and there's so much depth, and it impacts you. It just impacts you.
So if you're not starting a podcast, start it now.
So yes, I believe everyone should start a podcast. I also believe that not everyone will like the work that comes with doing a podcast. Like, I think everyone has a story to tell. Editing, all of that stuff sucks. I'm not going to lie to you. You can outsource it. I started with like a 2-hour show. I thought I was going to be Joe Rogan and Jocko Willink, right? And I realized that I suck at editing. And now I feel like I could totally edit a 2-hour episode, right? So the things you learn along the way. But yeah, it's a lot of work.
I want to continue on this conversation about podcasting, and that's going to be the main emphasis on our show. And before we do, I have some stats that I found from Oberlo. It's Oberlo. They've got this website has a list that I'm reading from right now, the 10 powerful podcast statistics you need to know. So I'm going to shoot off a couple of these. I'm not going to read the whole 10. You can go ahead on their website. But I thought some of these things about podcasting were really, really interesting. So I'm going to share these, and then we can react to some of these. So the website, the first one that pops up, it says, how many podcasts are there? And this is from the website says there are 850,000 active podcasts and over 30 million podcast episodes worldwide.
Man,
that's a lot.
I definitely, I expected the offline number to be bigger, right? Because people start podcasts and don't keep up with them. So I definitely expected the offline to be bigger. But the online number surprised me a little bit too with how big it is. So that's good that people are doing it. I think podcasting is only going to grow.
I think so too. The most popular device used to listen to podcasts. I think we kind of know this answer.
Has to be Apple. Has to be the Apple iPhone.
So I was going to think about devices. I was thinking that first, but according to this site, it only talks about the type of device. So this site lists smartphones and tablets as the most popular way of listening to podcasts, which makes sense. If you want something on the go, you take your device with you, and it becomes easier.
When you're running.
Yep.
It's funny because my podcast episode that dropped today at the time that we're recording this is with Ariel Schaefer, and she's with Dream Pro. And we were talking, she does like online course development. And we were talking about how courses are the newest version of podcast, because now you can access them on your phone. You can watch mastermind classes on your phone. You can do LinkedIn learning on your phone, right? Kajabi has on your phone application type learning. And so we haven't seen that type of integration since podcasting. And when it happened with podcasting, we literally talk about this, it became huge. And now the same thing is starting to happen with courses, and you see podcasts having behind the paywall kind of things, and, additional content if you're a member or a donator or whatever, right? And, or a donor. And so I think, yeah, man, I could definitely tablets and smartphones all day, every day.
So I guess two things is access to a podcast and portability. And I guess the other part is on demand. Can you control when you want to listen to it? I think that those are some of the factors with it. I've got two more stats that I want to share. Is it says, why do people listen to podcasts? It says, the website says nearly 3 out of 4 people listen. Let me say it one more time. Nearly 3 out of 4 podcast listeners in the US say they tune in to learn new things.
Okay. Yeah, I could buy that. I think you start trying to learn new things, and then you stay like anything else, right? You don't buy Nike because, you buy it because of the brand. So I think you start because you need something, right? I need a fitness shirt. And then you buy Nike because the brand behind Nike, or insert whatever, right? I think even more so with podcasts, that's true. You listen to learn, someone might listen to my course episode with that just aired this week, but then that drives them to all the other ones. So yeah, I would agree. It starts with learning and then becomes brand.
The last one I'm going to mention is about time spent listening to podcasts. The website says 82.4% of podcast listeners spend more than 7 hours a week listening to podcasts. And I guess just because it's probably even more now. This stat is from 2019. It probably hasn't calculated how much time people have listened to podcasts in the last year for pandemic. Yeah. But this has probably gone up because I'm thinking about commutes. I'm thinking about, you mentioned earlier about working out, taking it out for a run. And for me, I like listening to podcasts when I'm doing stuff at home, when I'm doing the chores, or just if I'm folding the clothes while my kids are asleep. I like to make sure I get some passive learning going while I'm doing other things.
I feel like that just tells me I need to create more 10-minute episodes, because I only do 1 episode a week. If there's 7 hours and I'm only getting 10 minutes of that 7 hours, I'm leaving a lot on the table.
So those were some stats from Oberlo, OBERLO.com. Just ran over a couple of podcast statistics. But Roman, I want to talk a little bit more about podcasting. And I'm interested about your podcast. And you talked a little bit about the origin and about why you created it. I've got a couple questions to talk to you about, your origins about your podcast. Now, looking into your podcast history, it looks like you started online and then you went to audio format, and now you've got this new. And you just briefly mentioned it, a 10-minute niche, which is different. Um, can you tell me a little bit about how your podcast journey came to this point?
Yeah. So, I have to say, honestly, it started, and I have to shout her out to Heather Parody. So she hosts the Unconventional Leaders podcast, and she was the first person to ever have me speak on their podcast. At the end of her podcast, she said, "Wow, you're an amazing conversationalist. You articulate all these different things. You should start a podcast." And I made the joke, and I say this on a lot of other podcasts. I made the joke, starting a podcast is like having a bar. Everyone wants to do it, right? Like everyone's like, yeah, I could start a bar, but the number of people who do it is relatively small. And so we went down this little path, and basically she was like, you should think about it. So I thought about it. I said, if I could get like 10 people to agree to be a guest, I would do it. I had like 10 people, or I forget whatever the number was, but it was like a number that I didn't think would happen, 10 or 50 or something. And basically overnight, like everyone that I reached out to was like, yeah, sure, I'll be on, send me the stuff. And I was like, oh crap, I guess I'm doing this. And I started, I thought I was, like I said, I feel like, and this is to anyone who wants to start a podcast, don't try to be Joe Rogan or, Jocko Willink or Ben Greenfield or whatever space you're in, right? Whether it's fitness or health or just, conversation, whatever. Don't try to be that person, because I thought I was going to be like the next Joe Rogan or whatever. And it's great to have like those soundboards, but you're also you. And so when I tried to be them, I found like, it didn't flow with me. It didn't feel right. 2 hours of editing sucked. I had no clue how to edit. They're outsourcing their editing, right? So there was a lot of learning curves that I didn't have. And so I basically like let my podcast die. I did that. And so I recorded like 12 episodes. And none of them aired. I didn't drop anything to YouTube or anything. I just recorded them and completely let them set, let them die. And about 3 months later, I said, you know what? I'm not going to let these die. I reached out to the very first person who was a guest on my show, Anthony Trucks. I told him, hey, I'm going to redo the podcast on a different format, and I want to have you on the show. And so he catapulted me back into doing it. I said, but we're going to try something different. I'm going to do 10 minutes. And he said, let's do it. And so we took off, we ran with it. We did 10 minutes. And then I got Marquez Ogden, another NFL player, to be the very first guest of the new format in 10 minutes. And we took off with this 10-minute mindset of giving people actionable tips in a variety of topics in 10 minutes or less. And it just took off. I found my rhythm. I found something that I like doing. Not even because the conversations were any shorter. I mean, I was still having 20, 30-minute conversations with people, but we were pulling 10 minutes of actionable that people would listen to and digest, and creating another, a weekly post every day, posting a video or a quote or something from that other residual information. So there was no like double tap. You know how if you get on social, you'll see people like giving you clips of what the show is. So every clip you see is usually not from the show, unless something was just so profound inside of that 10 minutes that I had to put it on there. So I was giving people, like, every time you consume the content, it's something new, it's something different, it's something educational. And, that just kind of became a niche for me and something that I thought had value and ran with.
That's an awesome start to where you came from. And the interesting part is you mentioned earlier that you were an Army interrogator. I have a Army public affairs background, and so the way I learned how to communicate with my audience is being a public affairs officer and dealing with communication. But also, I'm a former nurse as well. So using my former experiences has helped me with doing some of these podcast episodes and interviewing. How much of your Army interrogation background do you feel that you're plugging into doing some of these podcast episodes?
Yeah, I use it definitely very different than I did as an interrogator, obviously, but the concept is exactly the same. An interrogation is a conversation, right? So really and truly, that's all this is me having conversations with people. And the goal is different, right? So when I was interrogating in Iraq, Afghanistan, Southern Africa, Northern Africa, wherever else, right? Anywhere in the world, it was with the intent of getting intelligence to change the battlefield, right? But now I'm communicating and interrogating somebody to get information that can help somebody's life be better, right? So I'm looking for the golden nuggets in that person's story. So the concept is still the same: build rapport, create safety in the conversation, make them want to feel comfortable to drop deep knowledge, right? Something profound that they haven't told on anyone else's podcast before, or to really dive deep into that topic that they know helps somebody, right? So I just say that it never ends, right? The communication never ends. And for me, the things I did in interrogation, the only difference now is I'm not trying to manipulate. When I was doing interrogation, I found myself doing some manipulation, having a very different approach towards human emotion, which that leads back to some of the traumas that I experienced and the rocky transition that I had. So now I say I'm not going to be that type of communicator. And so I work to create a very safe space to interrogate. I mean, we have some episodes dropping this year where we talk to people who were sexually abused and traumatized, raped. I mean, like, it's real talk. So we're not going to hold back, right? Like, we're going to talk about whatever topic comes up. And it's just deep. And I had one person, he came on my show, and I was the first episode that he ever talked about sexual trauma that he experienced in the military. I just, and I pride myself because he said, this is the safest space I've ever felt to have a conversation. And that's really what I try to do. I try to create safety. And if you talk to anybody who's an interrogator or has any experience with that, it's not what you see in the movies. It's not waterboarding and beating people down and stuff like that. It's conversation, right? It's creating safety and making a person feel comfortable to talk. And my only difference now is I want to make people feel comfortable to change other people's lives.
I want to start talking about gear. Now I know we can go forever talking about gear, and I love playing with gear and stuff. But what's your setup when you first started, and what's the podcast setup that you kind of do now?
Yeah, so when I first started, it was actually one monitor, an Apple laptop, like an old MacBook Pro, and a Audio Tech microphone, like a crappy one that someone let me borrow. And so that was kind of what I started with. And where I'm at now isn't that much different. I have a Surface Pro. My wife redid my wall recently, so I got more, the aesthetic stuff more started to hit to me because people were watching the video, right? Seeing YouTube, seeing content that I was putting out. So I felt that, the visual aspect needed to be there. The voice, the communication is there. I use Buzzsprout for uploading. I use the Audio Tech. Oh man, which one is it? The ATR 2100. That's my go-to mic. And it's funny because I always say, like, this is my favorite mic because I've tried the Yeti, the Blue Yeti or whatever. I had another person, send me a lapel mic and say, dude, you need to try like my lapel mic. You can lean back and do all kinds of stuff. I absolutely hated it. So this is the first one that I got, the first microphone that I bought. And honestly, I don't see myself changing. I think it's very personal preference, but for me, I record in a smaller space. So this smaller microphone really gives me the good volume and good depth. And even when I back out, it still sounds really good. The only other thing that I did recently buy is, against that aesthetic, is I got one of those little selfie lights. So I have one of those now, just to add some more lighting to it. Because again, visual is a big part of creating those video clips and things like that. But yeah, I don't have a crazy setup. I'm not big on that. I don't pay for like crazy editing software or anything like that. Everything I edit is done through free programs and software. I use DaVinci Resolve. I literally upload my video from Zoom to there, completely free. I do that. I can make subtitles. I can do all that stuff, right? So that age-old moniker, right? If you don't have money, you have time. Well, that's kind of what I discovered, right, when I first started it. And I said, I'm not going to spend a lot of money on something that isn't making me money, right? Because you can go deep down the rabbit hole inside of podcasting. So at the end of the day, I mean, I think a good mic is a have to have, right? Like bad audio just isn't really acceptable anymore. So to all those people who are like, I don't need a mic, I'll just use my computer one. Because I had a buddy of mine, he started one, and that's what he did for the first episode. I was like, yo, do you hear how bad this sounds? Like, this sounds like garbage. And he was like, yeah, I'm gonna order a mic tomorrow. And so he re-recorded. He was like, man, it sounds great. And now he's got like the boom arm one and all this crazy stuff. I just had him on my show. And I'm like, dude, I thought you were just going to keep it simple. He's like, nah, man, he's got these crazy headphones and all this stuff now. He loves it. And he's a big gear guy. I'm not really a gear guy. I'm a very minimalist person. So like I said, my Surface Pro with a ton of free programs, a microphone, and a selfie light. And that's pretty much how I run it.
You mentioned about mics, and it just jogged my memory about some of the things that cross over between podcasting and developing content for YouTube, especially talking head stuff, where even though on YouTube visuals, it's video platform, but there's a huge emphasis on making sure your audio is good. Because if you have crappy video, but you have good audio, people will still watch it, because they're also ingesting the information through auditory means, stuff through hearing. But if you've got 8K cinema footage, but you have crappy audio, no one's going to watch it.
Yeah,
And so
definitely. I look at it, I think of you and me, like your video is way better than mine. Like you got this like great looking setup, dude. Like you look like you're filming like the next Michael Bay film, right? And I've got like a blank wall, right? But people will
cue
take
the explosions.
Right? But people will take that, right? It doesn't matter if your screen is crazy or this and that. Like obviously there's a little bit of upsell, right? Like in comparison. But at the end of the day, yeah, man, people will forgive. They'll forgive bad audio or bad video well before they'll forgive bad audio.
The last part I want to talk to you about being on the show is if you could go back in time and you looked at your podcast journey, what would you tell your then self? You know, we always talk about going back in time and, you know, if we had regrets or anything of that sort, but just relating to your podcast journey, what are some tidbits you could have whispered in your ear and be like, hey, I should have done this?
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love that question. Truthfully, the very first one, and I've said it earlier and I have to say it again because people have to hear this. Like, stop trying to be Joe Rogan. Stop trying to be Jocko Willink. Stop trying to be Jasmine Star. Stop trying, like, insert whoever your favorite podcast person that you listen to that inspires you, that you think I can start a podcast and be like them. Stop trying to be like them. Definitely take the lessons from them, but you're not going to be them. You may not like doing 30-minute content. You may not like just talking to yourself. You may have to have a guest. You may despise having a guest, right? So don't think that you have to be Joe Rogan to be famous, right? Because everyone starts a podcast and they like, I pick him because it's so easy, right? Everyone wants to be him. He closes this huge deal with Spotify. Everyone goes, I'm going to make this huge Spotify deal. And, it's not going to happen that way. I'm not saying that it can't. I'm not saying that people can't monetize eventually or even change the way they monetize. I mean, I had one guest who she said, I'm not going to wait for 5,000 listeners. She launched a coffee brand within like a month of starting her podcast to monetize her podcast. You can do it. There's ways to do it. I'm just saying, don't get so caught up in being that other person that you don't bring your authenticity to it, right? Because that's what I did. I tried to do 2 hours and this like deep dive into people's story. And I realized that didn't fit with my life. That didn't fit with me having a 3-year-old son. That didn't fit with what I wanted my show to be about. Like I wanted to give people real talk, real actionable talk in a quick segmented way. Well, 2 hours automatically tells me that's not quick segment. And so be really clear about what you want to do and don't be someone else, right? Because had I done that, I wouldn't have started, then stopped, then started again. The other piece of it is help everyone along the way. So I do a lot of stuff for people, no charge or anything like that. And people are like, oh my gosh, you should totally pay for that. Look, if it works with your model, do it. I know there's like lines for people and that. Definitely don't violate your own personal principle. But for me, there were people that I went to school with that said, hey man, would you try out my product? I have like one of them, RWB Enterprise. He has a honey and it's hemp infused. And I'm big into healthy organic living. So it's a local grown honey. So I tried it, right? I got to develop a meat rub with the lady who has coffee on her podcast because she saw some of my grilling posts and said, "Hey, do you want to do this?" Right? Like there was no like crazy money transfer or anything like that. It was literally like, "Hey, I want to do this with you, and I want to like grow in this space and learn." And so just take those opportunities, because you if you're comparing yourself to everyone else, you're going to lose. I mean, my best friend from the military, like I said, we were talking about him, with the boom mics and the gear and all that. He started a podcast because I told him to. Um, he started a fitness podcast, and he's got he just passed 2,600 downloads. And so
Wow.
like his podcast only has, I think it's like 12 episodes out or whatever. He got featured in a CrossFit magazine. He's talking to people who are competitors winning medals on the CrossFit stage, right? Like in the fitness space. And yeah, people are going to absorb fitness podcasts way faster than social podcasts and things like that. But I caught myself comparing myself to him and being like, man, my podcast must suck because here he is getting 2,000 listeners overnight. And I'm over here, still growing my listener base. I haven't had an episode, break 300 listeners and he's doing that consistently. And so as you help people, also realize that some of them are going to succeed at a faster rate than you. That's just like, there's other factors that you can't control. So do it for the love of the journey and the love of the connection and the love of the conversation. And then all the other pieces will fall in place. You may not, because everyone grows at different levels. Your podcast may not be ranked on iTunes at the beginning, but if you keep going, eventually you're in the number one spot in your category. And I think of that it's like a little picture meme thing that pops up on Facebook and Instagram from time to time, where it's got the people digging in the ground and there's like diamonds, and one person is like one pickaxe throw away from it, and all the diamonds would come flooding out. And he just turns around and walks away, and the other dude's like hella far away and he's still like picking at it, right? Like you don't know what it's going to become. So don't focus on what it's going to be. Focus on what you're getting from it, right? Be in that moment, because I will say you get to have conversations with some of the biggest people that you never think you will, right? Because I've talked to Rocco Vargas from, the Mayans. He Article 15 clothing, big in the veteran community, right? And there was a time where I never thought I would share space with that guy. And he's on a podcast. He's got my phone number. He texts me, like, you know what I mean? I have 2 NFL athletes in my phone. Like if you'd have told 20-year-old Roman that would ever happen, I'd have been like, yo, whatever, dude. And I would have thought it would be the coolest thing, right? And now here I am, and I'm like, yeah, that's cool. But sometimes I find myself seeing other people and going, man, I wish I had their guests. But then I'm like, dude, I have the guy who coached Kobe Bryant on my phone. Like he talks to me, we communicate regularly. He wrote a book, Raise Your Game, and he's going to write another one. He's going to come on the show and talk about that. Right. Like, like I get to share space with all these amazing people. And if you get so caught up in the comparison game, you'll miss the beauty of the people that you're getting to communicate with. And so I think like that has to be at the forefront of what you're doing, especially if you're doing an interview podcast. If you're not doing an interview, definitely remember, like, you're communicating to those listeners and they're looking up to you, right? Like you may not ever see it. You may not ever hear it. My biggest fan of my podcast is he's been following me since I was on LinkedIn, doing it like straight to YouTube, no anything like that. He would like every post. He would share every post. He would be the first listener on every on every YouTube upload, right? And dude, I don't know this guy. Like we have, I mean, I just randomly added him on LinkedIn because of some shared connection. And he was like, hey, would love to be connected, right? Like the typical jargon. And he's like my biggest podcast fan. But you never expect it. He's older than me, definitely well more developed inside of business than me, but he thinks my stuff is gold. And, you'll never know you may never know who that person that thinks it's gold is. But if you're not putting it out there, you'll never know. And, you'll never know the impact you have on them. So don't try to get so caught up in the numbers and the likes and the vanity metrics and all of that. Don't get me wrong. They're good overviews. They give you a good idea of where your show's at, where you're going. They help you understand how you're growing. They help you understand what content people like. Cause I do a 10-minute show. When I drop a 60-minute episode, I will have half the downloads that I normally have. because people are used to 10 minutes. So they're like, yo, Roman, why are you changing the script on me? Go back to what we like, and that's fine. But it helps you know those things. So, use them for what they are, but don't let them be so in your head, because I mean, I would catch myself every day. Like, how many people downloaded it? The moment it went up, how many people looked at it? How much engagement am I getting on this? Am I getting on that? Right. And I mean, you could go down that rabbit hole forever, but don't. Just focus on good content and it'll win out. I mean, I promise you, like, if you really believe in what you're doing and you're passionate about it and you want to put something out there for the world, man, it'll go. It'll gaslight like you don't even believe. I mean, I have listeners in Russia, I have listeners in Africa, Europe. I mean, I'm pretty much I've hit every continent. Um, and that's a cool thing to me. Now, do I have like thousands of listeners in all those places? No, but you don't have thousands until you have one. So go with it, man. Like, run with what you have, run with your idea. And I will say, if you have that idea for a podcast in your mind and in your heart, and you keep coming back to it, that means you're supposed to do it. Like, that's whether you're religious and you believe that it's God. I mean, I personally believe it's God speaking, but whoever you believe it is, right? Whether it's God, fate, destiny, the universe, whatever, right? But if you have that constantly gnawing at you and saying that you should, then that means you should. So go after it, try it. And it's going to be nasty. It's going to be ugly. Dude, I listened to my first episode and I hate it. Like, I not to be mean, I love Marquez Ogden. He was a great guest, but I look at the cover art that I made for it. I look at the clips that I put together for it. I love the conversation. We had an amazing conversation, but I look at the content that I did around that, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I hope people don't judge my episode on this. I'm like, please listen to like 3 more and see like the clips for 3 more. Like, don't just pick that one, because they were very raw clips. It was very raw audio. It was very different. I was learning things, and
we
this
also
is
we all have to start somewhere. So it is nice to reflect back and see where we started and where we are now, and that's all part of the journey for that. And the one thing I liked about what you said was about being able to help people along the way, because you never know where you might be later in life. Our paths keep going in different areas, but you never know when we might intersect again. And so someone that you may have helped out in whatever form or fashion, you might see them later on in life, maybe parallel on the same journey, and then you might meet up with them later and might see the impact that you have. So paying it forward is, I think that's an awesome thing to do.
Yeah, and don't just look for strictly the big names. I mean, one of my top 5 episodes is he's a kid, man. He's younger than me. He's a kid, but he started a social media, videography and stuff like that around him and his brother's woodworking company. And his name is Brendan, and amazing, like, social media stuff. I mean, he was picking out the algorithms for Instagram, at the time. And obviously those kind of episodes age quickly, right? Because the algorithms keep changing. But he was talking a lot about the algorithm and things like this and the fundamentals to social media content posting and things like that. And, he's pretty big now. He's gotten a huge following. When I first started, he was relatively big, but now he's getting like sponsorships and all these different kind of things. He's like, hey man, we need to circle back and I want to talk to you, and we can share networks and stuff like that. So like, you never know where anyone's going to go. So always look at everyone like they're the king and queen of the world, because they're the king and queen of their world.
And the other part is that everyone has a story to tell. And as a communicator and even as a podcaster, it's our job to kind of grab the story out and being able to tell it. And I think that's the part for me that I enjoy the most about doing the podcast, is trying to figure out how can we have the discussion, and where's the story and where can I bring it out. And that's fun for me. And I'm sure it's definitely fun for you as well.
Oh, I love it. I love every second of getting people's story. And it's, everyone surprises you, like that simple question that you asked me at the beginning is the same question I ask all of my listeners. So tell me your story. And you'll talk to a person like an NFL star, and you're like, man, his story is going to talk about, how he rocked the NFL, was in these Super Bowl teams and all this stuff. And then he's talking about how he realized the importance of, family and the importance of prioritization and the importance of knowing yourself and things like this. And I'm like, dude, that's not at all where I expected the story to go. So I love the way people surprise me with their stories.
Real Talk with Roman is that's how people can find you on their favorite podcast platform. Is that right, Roman?
Favorite podcast platform: Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Real Talk with Rome, right? But if you look up Real Talk with Rome, you're still going to find me because I'm throwing that hashtag up like crazy. Clubhouse, Real Talk with Rome, right? All the different places that are out there. Yeah, Real Talk with Roman. That's where I'm at.
You just opened up another can of worms when you just said Clubhouse, because that's what I've been playing around with it the last couple of weeks, ever since one of my old Army mentors gave me an invite. I'm like, no way, she has access to this? I'm like, how did you get an invite?
It's crazy. So I went down a rabbit hole with it. So I will tell you kind of a little bit about me. I have a very addictive personality. I know this about myself. And so I always judge new things that I bring into my life on how they become addictive to me. And at the time that I did it, I spent like a week straight consuming it. Pretty much stopped on, I wasn't doing podcasts at the time. Like I was on my little break. And so it worked perfectly, right? So I could spend a week consuming it. But then I realized like, this is very addictive. Like my wife was watching shows by herself in the room. I was in my office doing Clubhouse, and it was great. Made some great connections, some amazing people. My Instagram grew like 40 followers overnight, like crazy growth. The growth rate is insane, right? But along with that, I had to look at, how does that align with my strategy of what I want to do, right? Because any platform can give you what you need. I think that Clubhouse is definitely something that I have to fit into my strategy because I'm big on communication. It's a communication platform, but also it's going to take off. I mean, everyone likes it. Everyone's seeing it. Everyone's doing it. It's definitely got a place. What that place looks like for me, I'm still trying to figure out. But it definitely has a place. It's great.
I'm looking forward to how they're going to evolve it. It's still in beta. It's still iOS only. It's got a lot of potential. I'll say that. And I am having fun crashing these rooms and finding out who else is interested in using it. I think, was it yesterday? I was in a room with Christy Teigen.
Yep.
To think that the access is now, barriers of access have been broken down, where I'm actually listening to Christy Teigen in real time on this platform. It's just crazy. And then I missed the part where Elon Musk was on Clubhouse earlier in the week. So I think it's just fascinating, and I'm looking forward to see where it takes off from here.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. I see the other platforms coming in hot for it. You know, like Twitter's starting to put their version up. I bet Instagram has one up by the end of the year, right? So it's just wild how big it's going to become. Like everyone's going to have something on it, quote unquote, right? And like a lot of people who are like, oh, I'm not in it right now. Like I'm not jumping to the next fad. I understand that mentality, right? But I also, I don't think this is one that's going to just be a fad. I think it'll change on the platforms, right? And you'll see platforms start to pull it, right? The Instagram influencers who are big on Clubhouse talking about how to grow your Instagram will just start doing that on Instagram, right? Like it'll kind of shift to these like sub cliche markets. And, you know, LinkedIn is really big on Clubhouse right now. But if LinkedIn had its own version, the LinkedIn people would do it on LinkedIn, right? So I think that that's going to be interesting to see how everyone clicks out once the platforms put their version up, and who's going to be like the OG Clubhouse and how that's going to work. Like, so I'm interested for that power shift when that happens.
Looking forward to it. Roman, this was awesome. If you're not following Roman Roberts on Real Talk with Roman on your favorite podcast platform, you need to go ahead and do it. And Roman, I need to have you back on the show.
Hey, I would love it. This has been an amazing conversation. We're going to get you on Real Talk, and we're going to have an amazing conversation there as well.
Thanks for watching our video. If you want to learn more about WazaMedia, go to our main channel over here. And if you want to see more podcast episodes, go over here. See you next time.